Hi guys, thanks for coming to watch this video. If you didn't catch the first one, it will be linked at some point in the video and the description. Basically, this is me recapping what I've learned in some guitar lessons or a guitar lesson that I've done, which going by the comments from my first video is something people seem interested in. This video's ended up being quite long. I've already edited it and everything because there's sort of 3 or 4 main parts to it. So just please look down in the description to use the timestamps, which I'll put reasonably detailed timestamps so you can use what you want, go back and forth, or just watch the whole video as it is and see what you find useful. Obviously everyone's at different levels when it comes to learning and playing the guitar, so some of this might be relevant to you, some of it might not be, but even if you're way more advanced, you might find the odd little thing or just be reminded of it. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this one, and if you do, please give the video a thumbs up, and yeah, enjoy. Morning folks, today we're going to be getting on with my second lesson essentially. If you didn't watch the first video of this little series, a couple of weeks ago I had my first guitar lesson in 20 years. I didn't play for most of that time. I picked up the guitar again in January 2020 and it's taken me until now to take lessons. And as I said before, that was really a silly thing of mine. I wanted to be good enough to take the lessons. But if I would argue that if you're picking it up again or if you're starting from fresh, you should definitely get lessons as soon as possible. Your teacher will be able to take you from whatever level you come from. Now, if you wouldn't mind, it's very early this morning, so if you indulge me while I make some coffee, and then we'll get on with the lesson. Cheers. Okay, in the last lesson, if you watched it, if you didn't watch it, I'll put a link up here. I was learning some basic ways of doing the 12-bar blues by altering chord voicings. So we did a simple couple of chord voicings in that lesson, and then I was to make a loop track with those to get used to some simple comping work. And I played around with that for a while, got reasonably comfortable, and you know, I felt like at least that's a sort of an exercise I can do a couple of times a week, just sit there and play the very basic backbones of a 12-bar blues rhythm section. Okay, so in the second lesson we've taken those simple beginnings of the sort of rhythm element and discussed how to move that on. Now, whilst the actual chord sequence stays similar, I mean, there are several different ways to play the 12-bar blues, and obviously as you progress you can add in jazzy elements and all sorts of things, but for a basic 12-bar blues the chord sequence is going to stay the same. Then it's up to the individual guitarist where they want to play those chords, what voicings they want to find. You can stay in the most obvious areas, which there's no problem with that at all, and I think finding a way to group all the notes in a similar place is very useful. As someone said in the comments last week, you can get from the A7 that I was playing to the D7 by moving down 1 fret like this. Okay, so to keep this very simple, in the A position, which would be, you know, playing at the 5th fret, I would used to often just play a whole bar chord. So you can add that 7 back up there, but you've actually got it played. Okay, so what I learned in the first lesson was to pick out the right notes from there, so you can play fewer notes but it still sounds like the same thing, and you don't need to play what the bass guitarist is going to play, which is, you know, down here at the bottom. So we can pick out the 7, which is G in the A chord, and then the major third, which is C sharp, and then we can play the root, which is either the open 5th string or fretted over the top with your thumb, 5th fret of the 6th string. You can see how it is the same thing, and you don't need to play more than that essentially. Okay, and then to move on to the next chord, the D7, I might have often played like this in that standard. Well, I was saying last week how you can just move up to the 10th fret, which is D, and then play the same thing as you played A, but play it in the D position. You'd have to mute the 5th string with your thumb, which is what I'm doing here. But as someone pointed out in the comments, you know, which is very useful, you can actually just move this down a fret, and I'll show you why. So it would be, and that's because there is a D chord here, which would be the 5th fret of the 5th string, 4th fret of the 4th string, 5th fret of the 3rd string, and actually you can play it then with this 3rd fret of the 2nd string, which is D. But you can just play 2 notes of it. So instead of playing the whole triangle shape, you can miss out the root if you want to. That's the root. And you can just play these 2, 4th fret of the 4th fret of the 4th string and the 5th fret of the 3rd string. And that leaves you a very economical way of playing. You can actually then bring your finger over to play that root note occasionally if you want to. That would then allow us to add in some extensions like the 9 here, which is the 5th fret of the 2nd string, the E, or even the sharp 9, which is that Hendrix chord. Now, I find that this is a much more, I don't know, it feels like a more pro way of doing what I was trying to do before, which would have been whole chords. Or it would have been moving up all the way from. So yeah, you can find that when the notes, you know, the notes on a guitar are in so many places that you can find your own way of. And then you've got your E here. Again, there are other ways to play that. You can play. So it's actually all A, D, and then E. Because same as D is here, E, the root note E here, 7th fret of the 5th string, gives you the E7 here. There we go. And then you can put together a nice simple. So that's a really easy and useful way to do it. So if we were to stick with that pattern for today, just playing that A7 and that D7, what can we do to add some element of difference or extension or interest to it? And I like this 6th chord. So you're just adding the 6th note on top. The 6th note in this case being the F sharp. It sounds like this. So talking about extensions, we can still use that simple shape of the root note down here at the bottom, or with the open A string, and then these 2 notes. And then we can add on some extensions. In this case, as I said, the 6, which is. So it's just a nice sounding, nice, I hate using that word, but I use it a lot. Because we could actually use the 7 if we got those larger hand span. There you go. This is just a simple extension, but it's feeding me the idea that you can just start to look around where you are and figure out what notes are where. Just adding those very small bits of knowledge, you know, every week or every other week and putting them into your practice, it really allows your mind to move more easily around everywhere. So I find it really useful. Now it's got this sort of like leading sound to it, you know, it sort of pushes you forward. So it's a good little extension just to add in. And what my teacher was, you know, again wanting to let me know is really, rather than learning things by rote, rather than learning them out of a chord book, which you can do, but if you learn them in isolation, you're often going to miss the context. It's better to sort of slowly learn your way around the notes, to know how a chord is structured, and to find, in many cases, just find your own ways to play them. Sometimes it will take a little bit longer than just learning it out of the book, but if you've taught it to yourself, or if you've been shown in the way that my teacher does, which is a sort of conceptual way of teaching, rather than sitting there and him saying, right, you play this note now, and then this note, and then this note, he teaches me why you would play the note and when, so that I'm not going to be left sort of standing there playing with another guitarist thinking, oh God, he's done something different than I expected and I don't know where to go. So just the way we're learning or talking about chord extensions is in that vein. You know, set up your basic shapes and then just start to play around with the notes around it. In this case, I've chosen the 6th note, but you can play around with all sorts of different extensions and find out what you think sounds good. Okay, so that was the first major part of the lesson where we talked about extensions, and that's something that I'm going to be on that sort of way of thinking for many, many months and years, of course, to figure out my own little extensions and to learn them off other people as I go along. But rather than just learning them rote from a book, I think this is a better way for me anyway. I'm a visual learner. I learn, especially when I talk with someone and when I sort of experience playing something. So it's a good way for me to go. Okay, so after that little chord section, we moved on to advancing following the changes part of the first lesson. That was the part of the first lesson that I really, really enjoyed, and something that, although I've been playing, obviously I've played for a while now, and I played for a long time when I was young, I've never really fully cottoned on to how you play the changes, and I needed to start at the most basic level. So last week, again, we set up a 12-bar blues, so that would be the A7, the D7, and the E7. And the real nugget of that lesson was that basically each bar of those chords, you could just end on the root note of that chord, which is a very simple and basic way to do it. Playing just to the root note, which sounds a bit like this in the A, for example, and then the D, and then back to the A. So I was always ending on that root note, the A, or the D, or the E. The only problem is that very quickly gets limiting, and it's not realistic, but it was a great way for 2 weeks to get into that frame of mind that there is actually a structure and a way to play these things. It's not just going by feel. You have to have some element of understanding of what is in the music that you can link yourself to. And I found just by playing like that, very simple, moving back to the root note for the end of each segment, whether it's a bar or 2 bars, that it started to open up possibilities to me as I'm thinking. So in practice, I stick to going back to the root notes, and then when I'm noodling around, I sort of played around with it a bit and got to understand where each chord sat and how I could link my lead playing to that backing playing. So the question was, how do you move that on in the next lesson? Okay, so let's talk about the notes that you have available other than the root note to end a phrase with. This is a good step to take once you've spent a couple of weeks playing just to the root note. So I was always ending on that root note, the A, or the D, or the E. So there are other notes we can end on. So let's look at the D. I take the D7 shaped chord, the main bar chord, which is running from the 5th string. That gives me the 5th fret here, the 7th fret here, the 5th fret here on the 3rd string, the 7th fret on the 2nd string, and the 5th fret on the 1st string. If I'm going to tell you what those notes mean, we have the root note down here. Okay, and then the A here is going to be the 5th note actually. Okay, and then we've got the C, which is the 7. Then we've got the F sharp, which is the 7th fret of the 2nd string. That is your major 3rd. And then up here we've got the A is the 5th again. That means we can use those notes in our phrasing as well. So rather than ending on the D here, which is what I've been practicing, we could end on the, let's say we could end on the 5 note, the A. So against that D7, the A feels different than the D does, because the D feels like this. Just feels so obvious, you know? Whereas the A feels more interesting, a bit of tension. Or we can look at that major 3rd, which is up here, the F sharp, the 7th fret of the 2nd string. And we can bend up to it. We could bend the 6th fret up. So suddenly you've got a lot more going on, and you can often bend up to that major 3rd. If I was in the A, major 3rd is the 6th fret of the 3rd string, the C sharp. So I'm bending up the 5th fret to the 6th fret. And then to the D. Yeah, suddenly you've got so many more options there, and you can do that in all the positions. So, you know, for your E7, you could work out the note, but you could also work out where they fall in other positions. So if I want to take the major 3rd there, that is your G sharp. That's the 9th fret of the 2nd string. So if I'm playing back in this position, I can actually bend up the 8th note, the 8th fret, sorry. Not a particularly good example, but you get my drift. You can start to find those notes all over the place. So you've got your G sharp up here as well. So, and that's how you can figure out your brain starts to make these connections. They're not always going to be poignant or particularly useful in isolation, but as you start to add all the dots together, this is how these exercises really help, I find. Just work out what those notes are and what they mean. You know, there's rules and then you can break the rules, but let's learn the rules first. That's what I'm going to do anyway. And by doing that over and over again, it's not about playing great music, it's about training your ear almost to understand where the notes fit with each other. By doing that over and over again, and then starting to do it up and down the fretboard, you can start to gather which notes can go with which chords. And the more and more I'm learning about this, the more I realise that I was always trying to break the rules without even knowing what they were. And that's that's something I tend to do in life. Like I go into a situation thinking, well, I'm going to do it differently. But ultimately, generations of musicians and thousands of incredible musicians have shown, I think, that you need to have a good understanding of the basic way to do it before you start to implement your own ideas in it. So that's, you know, what I'm working on with that. So just to summarize that quickly, instead of just landing back on the root note at the end of a phrase, you can land on one of the other notes that's prominent within that chord. I'm sure he'll also take me to situations in the next lesson or two where we fall outside of that as well and figure out more interesting ways to do it. But to start with, this is the next part of the sequence. Okay, so one last element to add to that is another exercise that basically Ainsley set me to do with arpeggios. And it's really another way to figure out chord voicings, to figure out or to train your ear to see the relationship between a chord and its root, its third, its fifth, its seventh, and eventually other voicings, to find different places also on the neck where you can play different things. So I'll just show you this little arpeggio sort of exercise. Okay, what I've done is created a very simple loop, literally the D7 chord being played in a bar shape. And we're going to hear what it sounds like to just arpeggiate sort of the notes over the top. Very, very simple, in a very simple way. This is not something that's easy to show you because it's not a case of a set exercise, but what I like to do is sit here and look at the fretboard. So, this isn't something where I'm going to be extremely polished, and I like to look up and down the fretboard and think about what notes fit and when. And what I'm trying to do here is to tune my ear essentially to what notes would work well. Obviously, I'm using the chord shape itself. I mean, if I take this D7 here, if you don't know this one, this is 5th fret, 5th string, 4th fret, 4th string, 5th fret, 3rd string, and 3rd fret, 2nd string. And then I could come to the main bar shape. And then you'll hear, the reason it's useful is, first of all, you will pick up patterns across the fretboard. Secondly, you will occasionally, of course, like that, play the wrong note, and you'll really start to hear what's going on. And the more mistakes you make and the more correct decisions you make, the more patterns you put in your head, the more useful this is going to be, because I'll figure out, for example, this is really bearing my my soul for all to see, really, isn't it? This is the work behind the scenes that doesn't sound great. It's a little bit laborious, but if you just take your time, just give yourself, set a stop clock for 15 or 20 or 30 minutes, just play those chord shapes you know. Play any D7 shape you know. In your head, be saying to yourself, okay, this is the major third, this is the 7. And then you'll find them in other places. So, the 7 being C, you'll find it here. And you'll start to connect the dots. And that's the best way I can put it. Pick one chord, figure out the notes from it, figure out the patterns from it, figure out what notes go with it. Okay, lastly, I've been talking to Ainsley about how I want to play solo. I enjoy, I'm not going to be a touring musician. I'm not probably even going to be a recording musician, really. This is a hobby, a passion, and something I'd just like to get really good at. And, if that's all that ever happens and I can play the guitar pretty well for the rest of my life, I'll be very happy. So I want to learn how to basically play that style of rhythm and lead embellishment playing that's become really, really popular on YouTube, because that's obviously often you're by yourself. Music shop demos, for example, I often watch the Carter vintage ones, show off how people can create a whole musical piece on the guitar in such an effective way. The problem that I've been having is not only the knowledge of chords is been lacking, so I'm stuck in certain places. Secondly, is my actual technique for allowing the rhythm to build up in a piece. Again, it's to do with structure and it's to do with knowing some of the rules around things. Essentially, as Ainsley put it, imagine you are the band. Now, if you've got a simple 3-piece band, you need to essentially give your listener the element of rhythm that the drum player would give you. You need to give the bass, lower elements, the driving force, and the sort of often with bass playing, you know, you're playing around those chord structures, arpeggiating, playing those various root notes, major thirds, minor thirds, whatever it is. So you need to be doing that basically with your thumb. That's one way to do it, and something that I'm working on. And then you have the more articulate elements, shall we say, playing around the melody, filling in the chords. That's the guitar player's job. So you need to figure out a way to do all three of those things. Now, it's something I've known that that's what I need to do. But again, without having a teacher, the problem I had was just not practicing properly, just not having a focus and just sitting there and thinking, right, today I'm going to figure out how to use my thumb properly. And then after 1 minute of not being able to do it because it's really hard to start with, just going back to what I normally do. So knowing that I've got another lesson in 2 weeks and I'm a person that doesn't like to turn up unprepared, it's been 2 days since my lesson and I've sat yesterday for 6 or 8 hours giving myself quite a wrist ache and a thumb ache practicing how to do this. So I'm just going to show you a little clip here of what I mean. This is my first real attempt at doing this, just trying to get an element of rhythm in there, something that drives the piece, trying to get a little bit of bass elements in there to fill out that landscape, as it were, of the music, and then trying to play, my melody on top. This is just my beginning point, so I just want to show you what it is. And essentially that's where the lesson got to. So in this next 2 weeks, I'm going to be practicing a lot with playing the arpeggios, arpeggiating chords on top of that chord. So arpeggiating the D7 on top of the D7, etc. Maybe doing that in 2 or 3 positions on the fretboard for now, just to try and learn my way up and down a bit more. I'm going to be practicing the lead phrase structure where you don't end on the root note only, but you end on the major third or the fifth or the 7, and we'll see where that goes. I'm going to be playing with a few chord extensions. And then finally, I'm going to be working on this whole thing of creating my own rhythm and bass section with my guitar. This is the movement that I'm trying to get better at, and the way you sort of slap. Obviously there's many different ways to do it. There's as many ways as there are good guitarists out there, but I need to get to that stage of being a good guitarist, so I need to learn a way of doing it, and the motion that I'm trying to learn is helping me out in doing that. So I'll finish the video just by showing you the last little bit I was playing yesterday that I managed to record, and I hope this has been another useful glimpse into the lessons that I'm having. And I had a few comments on the last one where people were saying, do you really think it's good to have, or useful to have online lessons? Yes, it's fantastic. It's not really any different from going in person. It would save me the time and the energy of getting there, taking my guitar, etc., etc. I think I will just stick to online lessons even after the whole sort of pandemic is over. It's flexible, and with Zoom and everything like that, it's not a big deal. It's more about what can you get out of that lesson. Push your teacher. Ainsley would tell you that I can bug him quite a lot by sending him like videos of various guitar things that I'd love to learn that I'm nowhere near ready to learn yet. But anyway, last thing to say is if you've not been to my channel before, I'm giving away this pedal when I hit 2,500 subs. It's a great pedal, the BB preamp. It's very often on my board. It stands for Big British Preamp. It gives you a lot of those big, sort of bold, edgy tones that Big British sound is known for. But it's also just really useful as a boost. It does pretty good gain sounds. All sorts of stuff. It's very good. So if you subscribe to the channel publicly and make a comment, you'll be in the hat, so to speak, for me to pull out a name when I hit 2,500 subs. So go ahead and do that. And lastly, today is actually a new guitar day, which won't be a massive shock to a lot of people who've been watching this channel for a long time. There's often a new guitar day. And so that will be one of the next few videos showing you what has come through in the post. So anyway, thank you for watching. Cheers. Okay, once again, I'm putting myself there out there without having 100% got good at something, but that's just the way I like to do it and to see how I progress over time. So what I've been working on with this is a simple chord structure that I was coming up with yesterday, which sounds like this. Okay, so we're basically going A is an A major, A dominant 7. Okay, so you'll see already I'm starting to get used to this idea of using my right hand a bit more rhythmically. So instead of just going, and then what I would have normally done is thrown in an embellishment, for example. So what I'm trying to do instead, and it's difficult for someone who isn't, I'm not a singer, so I don't automatically think of my music as something where it's like a song which would have the right spaces for the lyrics and the verses and all of that stuff. So I tend to just fiddle about and do whatever I like, but I'm trying to think, what would it really sound like as a song? So So you see, I'm keeping the same rhythmical element all the way through, even though that's not what I would do if I was, once I hone this piece of music, it will hopefully change up, but. So by doing that, I've got my timing, which gives the audience, that rhythm to go on. So in each situation, I'm giving myself a bass note to play off of, whether it's the A, the F sharp, G, now the second thing to notice is I'm playing some whole chords. But actually, when I was playing with this yesterday, I'd already got out of the habit of that, so it was going like this. And then I could actually go to an E. So I'm showing you my work in progress here, obviously making mistakes and everything, but you quickly go from thinking, okay, I'm going to do an A. to, okay, maybe I could do A major. And the problem with always choosing whole chords is that then you're very limited because, you know, the whole chord is there. And then what I always do is double stop the 6th fret of the 3rd string to the 7th fret. And then I end up doing that every time I make a new piece of music. So I thought, okay, let's do something different. You've got A dominant 7, so I could play that as a bar chord up here basically. So it's the open chord. And then the relative minor of A major is F sharp minor. You can go 4 frets back, so including the A, G sharp, G, F sharp gives you relative minor. Much like if you were in A minor, the relative major is C, so A minor. Anyway, so, and then my right hand starts to go, okay. And then I thought I'd break this chord up. So instead of playing the whole thing. And same here. Then I don't know what chord I've got because essentially there's an E major shape here. But actually I'm only playing and I'm throwing this D in. So, you know, this is a point where you play something and I don't even know theoretically what it is, but I'm just playing it. I guess that's actually the D dominant 7. Sort of a D dominant 7, but with something else, a 9. I'd love to get to the point where I can tell you all exactly what is going on, but in the wider scale, I hope you see, once you get out of whole shapes, I mean, the whole shape there would be, but there you go. Those are the elements that I want to improve on. I want to improve on chord voicings, choosing only playing 1 or 2 notes from this whole F sharp minor 7. The whole chord would be, if I pick out, for example, these 2. G major, A major, it's part of the E major, and then this part of the D dominant 7. B7 minor, B minor 7, E major 7. There we go. So what I would hope to work on next is more sort of those trailing bass lines, so more than one note. Whatever that is, you know, I've got to play around with that. Ainsley's got to teach me more stuff about how to do that. But it's a good start if you're in the same position as me. Get that right hand working.